So James Wiseman has been cleared to fully practice again. There's still no timetable return on when he's going to be able to come back to games, but it is an encouraging sign that he's able to practice again after missing a majority of last season, missing the start of this season. So we'll see where this all goes. But he said something interesting to me. And Kareth Berg reported on it, and Wiseman, when he was talking about the GLeague, said, "I would like to go back down there to get sharp physically and mentally." I butchered that quote really bad, but basically saying, he would like to go to the GLeague, just to get ready because he doesn't feel ready to maybe play against NBA competition quite yet. And I absolutely love this for him. I love it for the future of the GLeague, and I think for him, it's probably the right thing to do. But before we go any further, if you're new and you like basketball, really think you would love this channel. If you haven't already, feel free to like, subscribe, hit notification bell, I'm notified whenever I release a video. I make videos like this, just talking about basketball, give you my thoughts on current events, things like that. Also make videos take elements from film essays and apply them to basketball, so if either of those things interest you, this is the channel for you. Let's try to get 100 likes on this video so YouTube will recommend it to others, but let's get into it. So, to get into why I love this for him and I love it for the GLeague, I kind of want to talk about what I thought about James Wiseman, what he was viewed as by most others throughout his draft process, because I think that's important to understand where we are at this point in the scenario. So Wiseman was the almost, I believe, consensus #1 player in the country coming out of high school. He was ranked first by ESPN, I know that for a fact. I believe Rivals rated him first. I think 24/7 Sports had Anthony Edwards first, which I think I had Edwards at the top of that class as well in high school. I will be honest with you though. I was not a big fan of Wiseman. I wasn't very encouraged by what I saw when he went up against other big men that were of his caliber, or supposedly of his caliber in the class. I wasn't encouraged by the EYBL stuff at all. He just didn't look great. I felt like he was advertised as something that he just kind of wasn't. I thought he was definitely an NBA prospect, but maybe not this #1 guy. This was someone people were talking about as a #1 pick in the draft. And, to be a #1 pick in the draft as a center in the modern NBA, you have to be like an Anthony Davis level talent, or even a DeAndre Ayton, and I just didn't think that Wiseman was even close to that, based off what I saw from him at the previous levels. He goes to Memphis, there's a whole NCAA drama scandal, he only plays 3 games, looked really good in those first 2 games, although he didn't play great competition, played up against Oregon, which was his first real test against competition, and the only test he would get in college, because that was his last game, didn't look great. He was somebody I thought late lottery, mid-first round. Because I still thought, the physical tools are there, he's 7 feet tall, moves really well in a straight line, but he's not a great shooter. He took a lot of shots, but he didn't make a lot of shots. He was somebody that didn't move well laterally, because really was kind of limited defensively to being a drop big, wasn't a great passer either, and those are plays for guys that are 7 feet tall, 230 to 240 pounds, long arms that can run the floor very well and block shots. And that's what Wiseman was. But in order to be a top 2 pick in the draft, you have to do more than that. And Wiseman, based off what I saw, just really didn't do that. Wiseman ends up going 2nd overall to the Golden State Warriors. And I will admit, there were flashes there with him. He was somebody that averaged, I want to say, 12 points, 6 rebounds, almost a block a game in 21 minutes. There were games he came off the bench, there were games he started. It was rather up and down. There were moments he looked really good. There were moments he didn't look good at all. I will say this, there were more shooting flashes than I expected to. He showed a lot more promise as specifically a mid-range shooter, I want to say, than anything. And I will say, when he was playing his role, he looked pretty good. The role of a guy that, sets screens, rolls to the basket, runs in transition, catches lobs, things like that. When he was doing that stuff, he looked solid. There were some times the lobs he couldn't catch and things like that, so that was somewhat concerning. But for the most part, like, doing the traditional drop big stuff, he looked pretty good. The problem was he would try to force the issue from time to time. Then he has the injury that sidelined him, and has still sidelined him up to this point. So obviously at this point, Wiseman has been medically cleared to fully practice. Again, like I mentioned in the intro, there isn't really a timeable idea of when he's actually going to be able to play in NBA games again. But, and like I also mentioned in the intro, I was very encouraged by his comments about the GLeague. I think Wiseman at this point understands that maybe he's not ready. Maybe he's not ready to come back physically or mentally, because it's not easy when you're coming back from injury to play in the best league in the world. People just don't come back and they're great right away for the most part. Especially when it's a long-term injury that's kept him out as long as it has. It's going to take time for him to readjust. I think going to the GLeague is a great way for him to eventually readjust. And maybe get acclimated again, and maybe get himself mentally prepared to play again in the NBA. The GLeague is not a bad thing, and I'll be quite honest with you, I was very much I guess the word is proud of Wiseman for saying what he said, because, it's hard as a guy that was ranked as highly as he was. Even if I didn't personally agree on it, it still was the fact that he was ranked highly among the mainstream. He was viewed highly among the mainstream. He was somebody that was the #1 player in his high school class. Somebody that was a top 2 pick in the NBA draft. People thought he was so good that they only needed 3 games in college to say that he was a top 2 guy. Whether I agree with that stuff or not doesn't matter. It's still the point that the expectations were high for him entering the league among the mainstream. The Warriors had high hopes for him. He was a #2 pick. They invested a lot of draft capital. And for somebody that has all this expectation and weight, I would understand why the idea of spending time in the GLeague outside of scrimmages and actually playing in the GLeague wouldn't be appealing, because it doesn't look good. But I think that has a lot more to do with, the idea of someone not liking the idea of going to the GLeague in Wiseman's situation has to do with the views around it. And I think for Wiseman to say that he is more than open to going to the GLeague is very mature given the situation. And I think I hope actually, it starts a trend, because, NBA players aren't always going to be ready when they're 19, 20 years old, coming off injury, or even just healthy, but maybe not just ready because they're young. And the GLeague is a great place for them to develop. And, sometimes the best way to get development is through experience on the court. And you're not going to get experience on the court sitting on the end of the bench. And for young players that maybe have a lot of potential but need to develop, maybe going to the GLeague, getting them reps there is a good thing. And I'm totally open for it. I don't care if you're the first pick, the second pick, third pick. If you're not ready, you're not ready. But if you have potential, maybe going to the GLeague will pay off in the long run. Because if you develop them properly and maybe send them to the GLeague to get playtime, because you're not just ready to give them minutes off the bat because they aren't ready yet. But and again, it might look bad for those first few years not having them play a lot, having them spend time in the GLeague. But if that in the long term turns into him developing into an all-star, it won't matter in the end. Pascal Siakam spent time in the GLeague. He developed into an all-star. Nobody cares about the fact that he was in the GLeague anymore because he's developed into a really good player. If Wiseman can go to the GLeague, develop, get the reps that he needs, get himself ready, and he comes back and is awesome, no one's going to remember the fact that he was in the GLeague. And if they do, they'll remember as how it was able to help him develop. And he's not the only one in the Warriors I think could benefit from this. I think Jonathan Kuminga could benefit from a lot of time in the GLeague. I think Moses Rudy would develop really nicely in the GLeague. I think he could benefit as well. And it extends beyond that. I think Josh Christopher would benefit from it. I think maybe Isaiah Jackson would benefit from it. He's in Indiana. Guys who just aren't ready yet, but have potential. If you're not going to play them, why sit them on the end of the bench? Send them to the GLeague, let them get minutes. And I think for Wiseman, kind of to be really the first vocal, top-end pick, high-end recruit to say, yeah, I want to go to the G League. I think it's going to be good for my development early on. That's awesome. Like, I truly do think that's awesome. And I hope it works out for him. Listen, I'm not the highest on Wiseman. I'll admit that. Wasn't high on him during the draft. Wasn't really high on his rookie year either. But I'm rooting for him to prove me wrong. I always say, I love when players prove me wrong because it helps me grow as a talent evaluator. And for Wiseman, I'm also not just rooting for him because I want him to prove me wrong. I'm also rooting for him because of the fact that he's somebody that, if this works out, him being vocal about wanting to go to the G League, and he goes to the G League, develops a little bit, and comes back and is awesome, it could set a trend and could maybe go away from people having this idea that the G League is a bad thing or a demotion. Because the G League isn't a demotion or a bad thing. It's a tool for development. And I am hoping for the best for Wiseman and prospects that hopefully take this route in the future.